6 brain patterns that drive growth. There's a certain kind of person who, in the middle of a quiet moment, maybe driving, maybe just before sleep, suddenly thinks back on something they did years ago. Not because anything triggered it, not because they're struggling, just because the mind went there on its own, turned it over, felt something about it, and quietly moved on. Most people dismiss that as overthinking, or they assume it means something is wrong, that the person is anxious or stuck. But there's something different happening there, something that doesn't have a simple name, and it almost never gets described for what it actually is. For a long time, the behaviors and patterns that lead to real, sustained personal growth have been lumped together under words like discipline, grit, or hustle. These are performance words, motivational words. They describe output without explaining mechanism. They tell you what growth looks like from the outside, but say almost nothing about what's actually happening inside the brain when a person changes. What we're really talking about are 6 specific neurological and psychological patterns, not personality traits, not habits you build. Patterns, recurring ways the nervous system processes experience, discomfort, feedback, and time. And when you understand them, something shifts, because you realize growth isn't something you decide to do. It's something your brain either learns to tolerate or it doesn't. The first pattern is what neuroscientists sometimes call error sensitivity. The brain has a region, the anterior cingulate cortex, that acts like a signal detector. It lights up when there's a mismatch between what you expected and what actually happened. In most people, this signal gets muted quickly. The brain moves on. But in people who grow, this signal lingers just a little longer. Not long enough to become rumination, long enough to become information. That person driving in silence, replaying an old moment, they're not punishing themselves. Their brain is still processing, still extracting something useful from the gap between who they were and what they did. The second pattern is something that psychologist Carol Dweck spent decades studying, though its roots go much deeper than a mindset poster. It's the degree to which the brain encodes failure as data versus identity. For people who grow, failure activates the learning network, the hippocampus, the prefrontal cortex, the parts of the brain that organize and contextualize experience. For people who don't, failure activates the threat network instead. The difference isn't courage, it's a nervous system that, somewhere along the way, learned that mistakes were survivable. Often that came from an environment, a parent, a teacher, a repeated early experience that communicated without words, you are allowed to be wrong and still be okay. And when that message wasn't there, the brain found other ways to protect itself, ways that looked like avoidance or perfectionism or staying very, very still. The third pattern is tolerance for ambiguity. The brain is a prediction machine. It is constantly, obsessively trying to know what comes next. When it can't, when the future is genuinely unclear, it produces discomfort. That discomfort is real and physiological, but people who grow have a slightly higher threshold for sitting in that discomfort without forcing a premature conclusion. Research in cognitive neuroscience calls this epistemic patience. And it's not the same as having no anxiety. It's the capacity to hold the anxiety without immediately resolving it through certainty that isn't earned yet. The fourth pattern is sometimes misunderstood as stubbornness. It's actually something closer to what psychologists call delay of gratification, but more specific than that. It's the brain's ability to maintain motivation in the absence of external reward. Most reward systems in the brain run on dopamine, and dopamine spikes on novelty, on recognition, on the hit of something new. But growth is rarely novel. Growth is often quiet, slow, and invisible for long stretches. The people who sustain it have a nervous system that has learned to generate internal signals, a sense of forward movement, of alignment, of meaning when no one is watching and nothing external is confirming that they're on the right track. The fifth pattern is what developmental psychology describes as integrative complexity, the capacity to hold contradictory information about yourself without collapsing into one narrative. Most people under pressure simplify. The brain prefers clean stories. I'm capable or I'm not. I'm progressing or I'm failing. But the people who actually change are the ones who can think, both things are true right now, and I don't need to resolve that yet. This isn't indecision, It's sophistication. It's the brain doing something genuinely difficult, maintaining multiple models of the self simultaneously without deleting the ones that are uncomfortable. The sixth pattern is perhaps the most counterintuitive. It's a specific relationship with discomfort, not the avoidance of it, but what researchers call reappraisal. The brain's default response to discomfort is to categorize it as a threat. Reappraisal is the ability to recategorize that same signal as information, not because it feels good, not because the person is fearless, but because somewhere in their history, discomfort was repeatedly followed by something that made sense of it. The nervous system learned at a very deep level that discomfort is often a signal that something real is happening, not a signal that something has gone wrong. None of these patterns make someone better. They make someone more capable of change, which is a very different thing. A person without these patterns isn't broken or behind. They're running a nervous system that learned to prioritize safety over growth, and that was probably the right call at the time it was learned. The brain always adapts to its environment. Always. What looks like a limitation is almost always an intelligent adaptation to a context that no longer exists. And here's the part that rarely gets said. Each of these patterns carries a cost. The person with high error sensitivity who grows from mistakes also carries more weight after them. The person with epistemic patience who tolerates ambiguity also lives with more uncertainty than most people would accept. The person who sustains motivation without external reward often goes long periods unseen, unacknowledged, quietly building something in the dark. Growth is not free. It asks something specific of the nervous system, and the nervous system feels it. If you recognized yourself in any of this, not the aspirational version, but the real description, the one that includes the heaviness alongside the capacity, then what you're feeling right now is probably something quieter than inspiration, something closer to recognition, like a mirror held up to something you've always known about yourself but haven't quite had language for. You're not overthinking. You're not too sensitive. You're not behind because growth has been slow or uneven or almost invisible from the outside. Your brain has been doing something very specific, very human, and much more complex than it looks. There's another layer to this, one that has to do with the environments and relationships that either support these patterns or quietly erode them. If that thread feels relevant to you, it's worth following.